Well, happy Wednesday, everybody. Looks like we're about ready to get a little rain here soon. So, a little torn today about what direction I wanted to go in for tonight's devotional thoughts. So I decided to go with both of them. Now, before you think to yourself, "Oh no, how long is he going to go tonight?" Let me just put your mind at ease. You know, we'll try to keep this short, okay, or within the time frame that we've been in. The first thought that I want to share with you comes from the end of Acts, where Paul is on trial. We looked at that a little bit last week, and actually went through 4 trials before heading to Rome. He went before the Sanhedrin. He was with this guy named Felix, Festus, and then Agrippa. I've always had kind of an interesting thing thinking about those guys' names. Felix, I always think of Felix the cat. So you might remember that. I'm going to date myself here a little bit, but Felix the cat, and then Festus. I mean, you've got to go with Matt Dillon, right? And Gunsmoke. So that's the way my mind works, as you know. But Agrippa, the trial before Felix was preceded or done by a guy, this flamboyant lawyer named Effie Tertullus, and he kind of had some nice things to say about Felix, which he was just kind of buttering him up. There was no truth to it, whatsoever. Felix didn't really understand quite what was going on. He wasn't familiar with too many things, and so with Jewish history and everything, and so he kind of felt like Paul was not guilty, but he didn't want to upset the apple cart, so he left Paul in prison for about 2 years and was hoping that Paul would maybe give him a bribe. Festus became governor, and so the enemies of Paul tried then to again get what they wanted, which was to kill Paul, and so they go before Festus. Festus thought Paul was crazy, but he knew again that he was innocent, but again, he was a people pleaser, and he suggested that Paul go and see this guy named Agrippa. So Paul starts giving his testimony to Agrippa and those who were around in the courtroom that day listening to what he had to say. And so he gives his testimony, and when he finishes, I think one of the saddest reactions that anyone could ever have is recorded in chapter 26. In verse 28. I want to back up a little bit to verse 24. But as Paul's giving his testimony, Festus interrupts and he says, "You're out of your mind, Paul," he shouted. "Your great learning is driving you insane." Perhaps he thought Paul had been studying a little bit too much and he was just going crazy with that. Paul responds, "I'm not insane, most excellent Festus. What I am saying is true and reasonable." The king, just picturing pointing over to Agrippa, is familiar with these things. And I can speak freely to him. I am convinced that none of this has escaped his notice because it was not done in a corner. "King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets?" And then he answers his own question. "I know you do." And then we have the response. Agrippa said to Paul, "Do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian?" The King James says there, "Almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian." The word "almost," kind of an interesting word, isn't it? If you look up the meaning, you're going to find that it'll say not quite, short of, less than, not reaching a goal. So the word "almost" is a lot of times kind of a negative word in a lot of ways. Someone can say, "Well, I almost caught the fish. Those boys almost ate all of the cookies. Almost no one called me on my birthday." And so it kind of insinuates not quite, short of, it's less than some expectations, not reaching this goal. And so Agrippa was almost there, but not quite. He hadn't reached that goal. And Paul then says in verse 29, "Short time or long time, I just pray that God, that not only you, but all who are listening to me today may become what I am, except for these chains." So he wanted everybody to become a Christian, and that was his whole goal. and what he wanted to do. Now, we don't know if Agrippa ever responded. We don't know that. We're not told that. But if he didn't, I just kind of wonder what went through his mind after he died and found out that Paul was actually telling the truth. And he found himself coming up short and didn't reach the goal. He didn't respond positively to Paul's testimony and message. It makes me think about those times when I have used that term to identify times when I've come up short. I almost called them. I almost said something. I almost went to see them. I almost asked him about that, or I almost asked them to come to church. So the first idea that I want to share with you tonight is keep almost out of things. Keep that out of your Christian life and your life in general. Just get it out. Act on it. Don't put it off to some more opportune time. If you do, you or someone you love might not reach their goal, especially a spiritual goal. And I think that was a real heart, for the Apostle Paul, that he wanted all these people, wherever they were, whatever role they had in life, he wanted them to know Christ, to become like him, and to be a believer. And so that's one thing that I want to share tonight that I think is important, is just that we eliminate that word almost, that we act on things, that we do it, we go ahead and get it taken care of. The second reading comes from the book of James. We started that this week, today, and James may be one of my favorite books in the entire Bible. It's like every verse just boom, hits me squarely. And in chapter 1, as we were reading in chapter 1, we read about these very important verses. I alluded to verses 2 through 4, and last week in the sermon about trials and tests and things, producing perseverance in our life. And James says that perseverance has to finish its work in order for me to be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. I like the sound of that, don't you? If my spiritual walk with God could rise to that level, that would be incredible. Spiritual maturity refers to wholeness, to a wholeness that most of us rarely experience. If I were to ask you if your walk with God was lacking anything, I'm sure you would say, yes, it is. You might be able even to point out some areas where but most of us would say that. The idea here is that James is trying to get at is to be wholly given to God as God is wholly given to you. So we understand the idea of being completely invested in something. We hear this, give 100%, to it. And we understand that a person can be 100% committed to something and yet still make some mistakes. So being wholly given to God, being mature and lacking nothing is really what we all really should desire. So how do we get there? How are we wholly given, to God? Well, James is just full of the answers to that. This is how you do that. This are the things that you need to apply to your life to be able to get to that particular point, to be mature, not lacking in anything. So his answers all the way through is kind of a mixed bag in this chapter, but one of the things that he says here is consider it pure joy when you go through these trials and these testings. Trials and testings sound like something that we would like to avoid, doesn't it? And yet what they produce is really what I should want in my life as I'm trying to become wholly, devoted to God, wholly connected to Him. So James lists some things here that we are to do. One thing, that we should count our blessings. Like the old song, count your many blessings. Name them one by one, see, and you'll be surprised at what the Lord has done. So we start out our day counting blessings that come from really about anywhere, including the good and the bad. Blessings come in all shapes, all sizes. If we aren't looking for them, a lot of times we'll miss them. A good illustration of this is Job and his wife. A story in the Old Testament. Job looked to God because of his trials. Mrs. Job cursed God because of the trials. So God is saying, James is saying, I can have joy in the midst of these trials. So to have wholeness, also, I believe, as he's talking about here in chapter 1, is to change my perspective about trials and tests. They produce increased spiritual productivity in me. They come and help me do that. Maturity is a direct byproduct of faithfully passing these tests, of getting through them, of going through that. That's what builds my maturity level and producing in me a better product spiritually. Another benefit is that he talks about here is our prayer life. There's nothing like a burden that causes us to go to our knees. Nothing like a trial or a test that causes us to go before God and lay that before Him. Faith that believes in God enough to ask Him for wisdom is a faith that has been strengthened through the obstacles that we face and go through. Faith that asks without doubting is faith that's held on to hope through the struggles and knows that God is present in our life. I think another thing that he points out here, one of the things that helps us to be wholly devoted to Him, wholly connected to Him, is just being a thankful person. He mentions that. He talks about that in this first chapter. Sometimes we attach thanks to good blessings. We're grateful for our house, we're grateful for clothes, we're grateful for food, we're grateful for this, that, and the other. And yet, how can we be thankful? Can we be thankful when we're suffering and when we're going through trials? Sometimes, as he points out here, we see wealth as a blessing from God. But James envisions a world where a poor person can actually smile in the face of poverty. And also, because of those who are wealthy, they can have faith in Jesus Christ. He imagines a world where wealthy people are able to utilize their funds for God and the people around them because they can't take it with them. So there's a couple extremes there that he talks about. That's real important. So we give thanks regardless of what state we're in, whether we're poor or whether we have a lot. Every good gift comes from God, the Bible tells us here. So we give thanks regardless of what state we're in. Blessings and more blessings are revealed because of the trials and the tests and the perseverance. I think another huge thing that he talks about all the way through this chapter is the benefit from being wholly given to God is it makes me rely on God for more wisdom. Rely on Him for wisdom. Wouldn't it be great to get a brain implant from God? The moment that we're baptized into Christ, the moment we become a Christian, God just gives us a brain implant to have instant, on-demand wisdom, on-demand knowledge of what His will is. That would help, wouldn't it? To live our life. Everything we face, we would know instantly how to deal with it. We would know how to answer every question. But that's not how it works. Wisdom comes, as James says, from asking God for it. Wisdom is the ability, when we ask God, the ability to apply knowledge in the right way at the right time. And, it's something that you just can't download it, like on your computer. You have to learn to ask God. And so again, these trials and these tests help you and I to develop that wisdom, develop that maturity over time. They help you understand the effects of temptation. He talks about that in here. Temptation comes from the devil. It comes from him. And it helps you understand what temptation is and what it can do to you. And understand it, again, there's a spiritual battle between light and darkness. And that's what Paul was facing in each one of his trials that he was in. He needed the wisdom, and he was able to apply that to the people that he was talking to. And so, just as a boot camp prepares a soldier for facing real battles, trials, testings, temptations, they train us for becoming wholly given to God. And then he ends this chapter beginning with verse 19. There's again just all these powerful statements where he says, this, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. there's some things here we need to get rid of. We need to get rid of filth, evil that's so prevalent. We humbly accept the Word of God that's planted in us, which he says can save us. He says, don't merely listen to the Word, but be a doer of what it says. You don't look at yourself in the mirror and fail to do something about it. You just, you change. You do what you're going to do. So wisdom would dictate that we listen and learn in an effort to avoid destruction. We get rid of this stuff that's keeping us from a relationship with God and other people. And we're a doer of the Word. We keep a tight rein on our tongues. That's a tough one, isn't it? That's a tough one. And then we look after people. We look after people. And so let's don't engage in the almost. Let's get it done. Let's be wholly given to the Lord and His work. Let's don't find ourselves, boy, I almost did that. I almost did that. I almost did this. I almost, shared these things. Let's do it, okay? Let's be doers of that so that we are wholly given to the Lord in what James says there in chapter 1. So that's it, okay? Not too bad tonight, all right, for taking too long. So again, hope to see you Sunday. Hope to see you at the building if possible, or to be online again. And number 4 in our series on staying focused. So I hope that you'll join us. Hope you're having a good week and staying faithful to the Lord. Okay? See you soon.